Welcome everyone. This is one of our annual report webinars, presenting our findings related in with changing learning, teaching and assessment methods. Just to introduce myself, I saw lots of familiar names on the attendee list, but those of you that don't know me, my name's Jamie and I'm head of education at the Health and Care Professions Council. Just a bit of housekeeping. We're doing a presentation and then we have a Q&A and discussion session as well. I would just ask that everybody keeps their mics off in the session, in the presentation session, then obviously you can turn them on if you do have questions or points that you want to raise through the discussion session. Please drop in any questions that you have into the Q&A or the chat, and we will come back to those questions and any other questions if you want to raise hands at the end or in the Q&A session. We have a fair amount to cover, and so we'll try to cover that before we do come over to Q&A, and we will share the slides from this and the recording at the end of the session too. So the agenda for today, I'm going to run us through a summary of HCPC's education function, just at a high level and briefly, because I know that many of you will know what we do really well. Then my colleague John Archibald is going to take us through the meaty bit of the session, I suppose, the focus on changing learning, teaching and assessment methods. We'll then do the Q&A as discussed, and then there's just a short outro from me about further reading and materials that we have. So, education function in the HCPC, what do? We set and maintain education standards. Those standards are focused to ensure that those who complete approved programs meet our requirements of registration. That's namely our standards of proficiency and our standards of conduct, performance and ethics. We approve institutions and programs against those standards, and that's part of our statutory function as an organisation. We make decisions about initial approval of programs, whether they meet all of the standards for the first time, and then we monitor those programs. So we monitor data, intelligence and information on an ongoing basis, and we ask education providers to engage with us at fixed points to reflect on the ongoing quality of their provision. On completion of approved programs, individuals can apply to join our register. So how do we do this? We have an education quality assurance model. Our intention is to be flexible, intelligent and data-led in our quality assurance of institutions and programs. And we have 4 pillars that underpin all of the work that we do. So the first is institution and program level assessment. We essentially want to undertake assessments at the right time, focusing on the right things, where we can consider cross-organisation or cross-education provider policies and procedures. We will do that, linking with our standards, but clearly we need to look at the programme and the detail of each programme too, to ensure it meets our standards and delivers people that are fit to practice. Linked in with that, we're flexible, so we don't undertake a one-size-fits-all approach to our assessments. We are right touch in the way that we work in terms of the regulation that we apply, and so we're really keen to make sure that that we are focusing on and I'll use inverted commas here, the problem before jumping to any solution, to make sure that we are focusing our resources in the right places to protect the public, which is our overriding purpose. As I've already mentioned, we use data and intelligence in the work that we do. So it's not just reliant on what education providers tell us, but we also are really keen to understand what's happening, within the sector, within particular nations and regions, and understanding the data that's available, things like Higher Education Statistics Agency data, National Student Survey data, and drawing some findings from that. Now that data isn't the end point of any of our assessments, and we'll always work with education providers when something comes to us from a data or intelligence perspective. And I've noted there as well already, but we have a 4 nations and regional approach. So my team are really experts on their patches across the UK. So the 4 nations and English regions, and it's really important that we understand that, so that we understand the context when undertaking our assessments. So the annual report, what does it do? It sets out a state of the nation for education and training in the 15 professions that we regulate. What we've tried to do is focus on key areas linked to quality of education programs leading to HC registration, and also challenges faced by the sector. We want to provide insight to our stakeholders. Some of that clearly is going to be reflective. So you may already know some of the things that we talked to you about today and through these webinars and some of the things that are in that report. But we feel it's really important that you understand, we understand what you're going through and what's happening out there. But hopefully there will be some insight for all of you today as well. I think the thing that we're able to do is tell you how those things that you're already aware of and you already know linking with our regulatory standards and the kinds of things that we're thinking about when undertaking quality assurance of providers and programs. So our intention today and through this whole engagement exercise really about the annual report is to enable some conversations, so conversations on the key areas, think about and talk about what might need to change, and also help inform how you approach specific areas as well. And the audience of this session primarily, really, I suppose we're focusing on education providers, but we do appreciate that there are other people in the room today. So I've seen that there are people from other regulators, from practice education providers or employers. So hopefully these sessions will be relevant to all. If we use the word "you," it may be that we're really referring to education providers because they're primarily who we link in with as an education team. To make sure that education providers are delivering programs that meet our standards. So last kind of slide from me is just a note on how we produced this report. So it was an evidence-based and factual report. It's based on our assessments of education providers in 21-22 and 22-23 academic years. And we are able to do this really because our quality assurance model enables us to understand what's happening at education providers. So it enables us to understand, and we note down through reports, as I'm sure many of you have seen, how education providers meet our standards, how they continue to develop and how they're performing. And so within those reports, what we've been able to do is take a view, say from this particular theme, and understand really well what we've seen out there in the sector over the last couple of years, how education providers have addressed and worked to this particular area and other areas too.
Okay.
So without further ado, I would just ask, so I've had to mute a couple of times everybody in the meeting now. Please can everybody just make sure that they stay on mute? It's really important so that he doesn't kind of throw us off our flows as we're presenting. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, John, who's going to take you through the substantive piece of this. So John, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's John. I'm one of the education quality officers in the department. I'm responsible for the Midlands organisation, so an extra special hello if you've come from the Midlands. So, next slide, please, Jamie, please. Thank you. So, we've picked up 3 key messages here about learning, teaching and assessment methods. First of all, we've seen a more diverse range of learning and assessment methods, and this, you may be unsurprised to hear, was propelled in part by COVID-19 and the public health measures that were put in place. And then following the kind of relaxation of those public health measures, innovations and changes have not necessarily reverted back to pre-COVID methods once this relaxation has happened and they've become permanent. So we'll go into more detail about this through the webinar. Jamie, next slide, please. So yes, linking in with our regulatory standards. So essentially there's a link here between the change into learning, teaching and assessment and your alignment with our regulatory standards. So we've picked out a few of our standards of education and training here because there's that potential impact. So it's for you to take into consideration if you're not already doing so. So we've got 2 around resourcing. So we've got 312, which relates to ensure there's sufficient resources for an effective program. And we've got 313, which is about the commitment of the program to supporting and helping learners to achieve and successfully complete the program. 5.2 is about the way practice-based learning is designed, allows learners to achieve the learning outcomes of the program, and following that, the SOPs. And then we've got 4.6, asks about the methods you use to deliver the program, supports learners, again, to achieve those learning outcomes. And then finally, we've got two related to assessments. We've got 6.3, which ensures programs of assessments which are effective at deciding whether a learner is fit to practice. And then 6.5 is about the methods used to assess learners help you to decide whether the learning outcomes of the program have been met. Next slide, please, Jamie. So with changes to learning, teaching, and assessment, we saw three drivers for change in this area. As I said before, we found COVID-19 had a very significant and lasting impact on the delivery of education training, had a significant impact on education providers and learners. And responses to the pandemic were often used as like an impetus, a catalyst for changes and innovations to education and practice-based learning. Many of these innovations have been adopted permanently once those restrictions have been eased. So we saw good innovation here in areas which aligned with our standards, areas such as delivery of teaching, practice learning environments, simulation, and learner support. Secondly, we've found that there's been challenges with capacity. In response, education providers and other sector partners needed to think differently about practice-based learning. And so many introduced simulation to support the practice-based learning provision. We saw there were increases for most professions in overall program capacity. And then from this, challenges included growing practice-based learning opportunities. From our assessments, we're confident that education providers have grown program capacity in a reasonable way, taking into account constraints in terms of like broader sector and external constraints. Alongside that, we hear from sector stakeholders that practice-based learning capacity is being reached. However, we found education providers have been able to show us they have secured capacity for additional learners, and this they've done by several means in terms of driving innovations in practice-based learning, simulation again, and things like smart timetabling. In relation to pedagogy, our analysis shows the pandemic was a catalyst for the review and implementation of the use of technology for delivering lessons and having assessments. And this links to what learners, once registered, will experience in practice. A key outcome of this has been an increased understanding of the opportunities that enhanced technology can give. And also the need to adapt to the use of technology, with the use of further technology, gave education providers the opportunity to see any digital skills gap amongst both staff and learners. So our conclusions here is that education providers have performed really well in this area. This is because they adapted effectively to the need to use technology to continue to deliver programs. And just to, I suppose, reiterate, we found education providers return to at least some traditional face-to-face teaching, and so retained a form of hybrid learning with that combination of online and face-to-face learning. Next slide, please, Jamie. So our regulatory approach and our quality approach is really set up to give you, as education providers, autonomy to put in place innovations and affect change. We assess education providers and new education programs through our approval and monitoring processes so that we can be assured that your properly organised to deliver education, and that you train learners to be safe, effective practitioners once they're on the register. We focus on whether education providers and programs meet our standards of education training, or SETs. The SETs are outcome focused, and that means that so they're outcome focused, so those who complete the programs meet our requirements for registration in terms of meeting the SOPs and the standards of conduct, performance and ethics. So we don't ask you to design and deliver the program in a specific way. So for example, we don't ask about, you need to, learners need to complete a number of practice hours, say. What we do is ask education providers to say how their program is set up, and how the kind of approaches and policies enable them to meet our education standards. Next slide, please, Jamie. So our approach to change enables education providers to make normal changes without any regulatory input. We only need to explore changes with education providers further, and maybe engage in a formal process when the changes are significant ones. This is because we're confident that yourselves as education providers are, again, that phrase, properly organised to deliver education and training. When we initially approved your program, we assessed your policies and mechanisms, and they obviously met our standards at that point. We also assess change through our monitoring of data and information. This happens on an ongoing basis between performance review, monitoring engagements. And so this receipt of data and information, this enables us to have conversations, open up conversations, and to explore the data further, depending on the situation. And then, lastly, at the bottom, you see the performance review process. So that gives you the opportunity as education providers to reflect on those areas relevant to quality. And then following the receipt of that information, we then have the opportunity to review and see how your provision aligns with our standards. Next slide, please, Jamie. Okay, so from our review of our education processes, we're able to see how important quality assurance is in the work of education providers. We found a strong quality assurance mindset at all education providers, with that focus on quality being prevalent throughout all of our assessments. In regards to innovations, we found education providers in the main took three key themes into consideration. So firstly, there was that investment. For instance, education providers made significant investment in simulation technologies such as virtual and augmented reality headsets, software, and simulation suites. Education providers considered pedagogy, so related to understanding the benefits of preparing learners for practice through simulation. And then thirdly, took into account staff and learner development. So we saw digital training provided to staff and educators, and then learners who, or some learners who may have had limited digital literacy, got additional support. Can I have the next slide, please, Jamie? Cheers. So the change to learning, teaching and assessment in a very short space of time, due to the pandemic restrictions, was one of the biggest challenges. So this led to numerous, I suppose, impacts. So we've got the immediate move to online delivery and upskilling staff. That included moving assessments online. as I said before, providing digital training to staff and educators, and then additional support to learners if appropriate. And then we also found that some learners had difficulty accessing technology in the practice environment. On the whole, we found that it was about finding the balance between applying the benefits of technology whilst keeping, I suppose, the strengths of face-to-face learning. The pandemic response from education providers saw them using various platforms like Teams and Zoom. We saw that for some education providers, this was quite a learning curve, because some were using the technology for the first time, whereas those who were already using these types of technology before the pandemic, we found they found it easier to adapt. The benefits to using technology, switching to online delivery and assessment, included factors like an increase in flexibility of delivery of lectures and assessments. Learners, we found it beneficial to have access to pre-recorded videos. And there was a knock-on effect in terms of enabled education providers to actually further explore how to incorporate technology in the delivery of programs. Education providers, say, didn't move back to their pre-pandemic approaches in their entirety after the restrictions were eased. We found that they saw, as did other stakeholders like learners, value in keeping some approaches to delivering education in that blended way. This also kind of reflects in parallel to like what normal looks like in practice. So with, for example, the kind of continued use now of e-consultations. Can I have a next slide, please, Jamie, please? Thank you. So our analysis shows that there's been an increased use of simulations in practice-based learning across education providers. We don't set a specific requirement for how much simulation is allowed on a program. We found education providers made significant investment in simulation technology. We saw that the core objective of these investments was to support learners to develop their skills in an alternative setting to practice-based learning. We found through education providers that feedback from learners on this new technology was overwhelmingly positive and was very much an improvement to the programs. Education providers also let us know that the investment in this technology will help prepare learners to become safe and effective practitioners. We found the main impetus for this increase in simulation was in response to the limited access to practice-based learning during the pandemic. We saw the investment in an increased use of simulation enabled the development of more key skills. Education providers continue to use simulation technology after the pandemic restrictions were lifted to continue to meet the needs of learners who also recognise those benefits on their learning experience, and as well as learners and education providers giving positive feedback. We also saw practice educators providing positive feedback in the use of simulation learning. Next slide, please, Jamie. Yeah, so kind of like a hot topic at the moment artificial intelligence or AI in education. So a small number of education providers reflected on the increased accessibility of AI and the impact it's having on learning assessments and assessments. It's an emerging area, and as a consequence, education providers recognise the challenges challenges and opportunities that AI and other related technology can give. In terms of our regulation here, we want to set an appropriate level of oversight here. So we've set a reflection point around AI through our performance review this academic year, and that will continue definitely into the next academic year. And then from that, we'll be able to explore education provider responses more fully through the next annual report. And yeah, at the bottom there, there's a note about the term artificial intelligence itself. So in the wider world, AI seems to take in all sorts of computerized ways of working. We know it can mean tools and systems which are relevant to allied health professions and used in practice. So it's just to ensure we know AI means anything which may link in with those kinds of technologies and systems. I think Jamie mentioned this in the AI webinar a couple of weeks ago. I don't know how many people were there for that, but we're not experts in AI. I mean, we might be experts in terms of like HCPC standards and regulatory requirements, but we're not putting ourselves out there as experts in artificial intelligence. Next slide, please, Jamie. Yeah, so just like in the or more at the start of the session, there was that link of assessments and teaching methods with standards of education training. We've picked out some here which are more related specifically with AI. And as you can see from the standards there, or hopefully you can be able to see, they're cut from the same kind of cloth. So you've got 312 specific, the resources should be it must be effective and appropriate. 4.4 is about the curriculum remaining relevant to current practice, and then we've got 2 around assessment. 6.3 about assessments being an objectable, reliable measure of learners' progression and achievement, and 6.5 about the assessment methods used must be appropriate at measuring the learning outcomes. Can I have the next slide, please, Jamie? So as well as linking AI with the standards of education training, we're also here kind of linking the work developments of AI with the standards of proficiency. So through the standards of proficiency, or the SOPs, there are requirements linked to this area for registrants. Yep, it's a non-exhaustive list, but we've picked out these as being a couple of key ones. So we've got registrants needing to keep their skills and knowledge up to date, and then needing to change their practice to take into account new developments, technologies, and changing context. We recognise that the use of AI is going to thank you. The use of AI is going to be different for different professions, but we also see that yourselves as being running programs, developing programs, you're the professional experts. So hopefully, you'll be able to see what emerging areas need to be considered as a part of meeting standard threshold practice. We don't set through our standards, lists of technologies individuals need to be familiar with. This is set more at a higher level, and that's mostly because it'd be, I suppose, it'd be impossible, for want of a better word, for us to keep an accurate list of things like technologies. And then you see at the end there's the link back to the sets, so the SOPs needing to be delivered and assessed through HCPC programs. And there's a link there to sets 4.1 and 6.1. Next slide, please, Jamie. Thank you. So in relation to AI in education, and I know that Jamie mentioned this in the webinar related to AI, but it's worth repeating. What we're asking education providers to do is to consider AI and linking it with the alignment of your programs to our standards. So we've got like 4 areas there for you to consider. So firstly, how you maintain academic integrity with the increased accessibility for learners of AI technology. Consider how you support your staff and learners to be AI literate. And thirdly, how you cover within your curriculum emerging technology within practice. And then lastly, consider how any biases can be mitigated through your developments. We're suggesting that you carry out these considerations at a wide kind of like institutional level, so we know of a central way of knowing your developments in this area. And that kind of links in with how we're going to review those developments. So we're not running an extraordinary review, a special like kind of one-off. You'll need to reflect on this area as part of your next performance reviews, which is predominantly at that kind of institutional level. That's it from me. Jamie, I'll hand over back to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Thanks for walking us through that. That was a great summary of where we have gotten to in the findings from the annual report. Really appreciate you doing that. Okay, so further reading materials. So the report itself, I've already mentioned it a couple of times, but there's a link to that one. We'll send that across in the slides, but that's also available on our website. There's also a really interesting report by the Council of Deans of Health, I'm sure that many of you have seen, called Pandemic Powered Improvements. And I suppose that really covers some of the catalysts for change that John was talking about, and actually does give things like case studies to help with your thinking if there is kind of further development there that you'd like to be undertaking. We are running a whole series of webinars, so you'll see that we are on the 3rd one here today. So we've got one next week about interprofessional education. If you do want to sign up to those webinars, the links are available on the website and on the slides. And then we've got some further ones: EDI initiatives, service users and sustainability and involvement, and then embedding our revised standards of proficiency. The webinars that have already happened, there are recordings for those now available online. So if you want to go back and catch up, then please do. And my last slide is just really to say thank you very much. Thanks for your attendance. I think it's been a great session. Hopefully, you've come away more informed on what we kind of understand and what we're asking. Thanks very much for the questions and the engagement from those in the room. I've listed here your kind of regional contacts, I suppose. So you'll see John's name is on there for the Midlands, like he was saying, but these are the right people to contact in my team from you as education providers. Like I was saying, they're the people that know the patch, they know the region or the nation, and so they're the right people to kind of talk to if you do have any points that you'd like to raise, or if there's anything that you think might impact programs that you want to discuss with them, please get in touch with us. We're very happy to have informal chats kind of before moving on to anything a bit more formal that you or we might need. So please use us as a resource to have conversations. And other than that, just to say thank you very much. Thanks very much for your time, and hopefully see you again soon at the future of these. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.